What is up to 10 foot tall with over a 10-foot wingspan, has leather-like skin, coarse fur, no neck, and glowing eyes? A malformed and massive owl? A deformed, mammoth-sized bat? An ancient cryptid or fae? Well, the truth is, we don't know what it is, but that hasn't stopped us from giving it a name. The Mothman. The most famous and widely discussed sightings of Mothman come from Point Pleasant in West Virginia. On November 15, 1966, two young couples from Point Pleasant saw a large grey creature whose eyes, they said, glowed red when the car's headlights picked it up. They described the creature as a large flying man with 10-foot wings and reported to police that it followed their car as they were driving in an area just outside of town. In the days following, other people in Point Pleasant reported seeing the same creature. But sightings of this creature aren't limited to 1966. There have been regular sightings since then, and I have two recent eyewitness accounts which come from Kentucky and Chicago. The second encounter includes a bizarre element which you've probably never heard before. I'll tell you what I saw one very cold, dry November night when I was younger. My family and I had just moved into a new house. It was on a hill on a little back road in a very small town on the east side of Kentucky. The population of my town at that time was probably just a couple of thousand. The night it happened, my family and I were still in the process of unpacking. We hadn't put the furniture in place and almost everything was still in boxes, but feeling tired from working all day, I went to bed around 11 p.m. I actually settled my little brother to sleep on the couch and I took his bed since my bed wasn't put together yet and he didn't mind. His bedroom faced the front of the house. His window was around 20 to 25 feet or so off the ground. I was laying on the bed just looking out the window when I saw it. It stood about 7 feet tall. I had no idea what it was, but I was frozen. I'd never been that scared in all my life, before or since. All I could do was lay there and just stare at this thing. There were no curtains on the window and I could see clearly. It was sitting in a tree about 50 feet or so off the ground, and I'd guess about 50 feet from the house across the yard. I sat there staring at it for what felt like an eternity. I remember that I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even blink. It had big, red and bright, glowing eyes that were looking dead into my face. I finally worked up enough courage to close my eyes and I quickly moved my head under the covers, and as soon as I did, the thing suddenly smacked hard into the window. I ran through the house screaming, "There's something outside!" I was crying in shock and fear. My mum and dad looked at me and said, "What's wrong with you? It looks like you've seen a ghost." My face was, they told me later, a deathly pale. I answered them in a shaky voice, "I don't know what it was, but Daddy, don't go outside." I begged and begged him, but he went outside anyway. A few minutes later, he came back in and said there was nothing out there. I kept screaming and saying, "Yes, there is. Yes, there is. It's out there. I saw it." When I explained to them what I saw and how I felt, they said I was crazy. But to this day, many years later, I will not go outside by myself. And even in the daytime, someone still has to watch me to my car. I've since heard of some pretty crazy things going on up on that road, but I never expected to experience anything myself. Years later, my husband and I went to the theatre and watched the Mothman Prophecies film, the one with Richard Gere, and I began reliving that terrifying night all over again. The way they described what they saw and what they felt blew my mind. My husband looked over at me and said, "Isn't that what you described to me when we first started dating?" I couldn't say a word. After that moment, I knew what I saw. I believe in my heart of hearts that what I saw is the creature they call the Mothman. In this encounter, the eyes of the Mothman were described as glowing bright red. But did you know that other sightings have described its eyes as glowing bright green, yellow, and even orange? Could the eye colour vary depending on the region or atmospheric factors? Hey, if you'd like to support my channel, it's easy. Just check out the links in the notes below. Now, the people who witnessed this next sighting may not have seen the creature's eyes, but were able to give a detailed and intriguing description. Well, this happened one day in August 2017 at approximately 1:15 in the afternoon. I remember it so well. We were on the southern end of Northerly Island in Chicago. I was there with two of my friends, and we went to that area to watch the eclipse that was going to happen over Chicago at about 1:30 that afternoon. We arrived about an hour and a half early to set up the equipment to photograph and observe the eclipse. So the three of us were quietly watching as the moon began its transit when we suddenly heard a brief but very loud scream. It sounded like squeaky truck brakes that squeal when you're pressing hard on them. At first, we thought that's what it was, just a bus or a big truck with brakes that needed changing. Then we heard it again, and this time it lasted about 3 seconds, which is quite a long time when everything else was silent. I instinctively looked up and I saw a large, dark object flying low over the docks that stick out into Burnham Harbour from across the water. We were on the east side of the island, facing west across the water, and could see the docks that line the harbour on the opposite shore. This flying thing looked like a large black bat, but it also had humanoid features of pronounced arms and legs. It was flying along the edge of the docks near the open water and was maybe 6 or 7 feet above the water surface. We saw it fly over most of the docks and then watched as it cut a hard left. We saw it gain altitude as it went over toward Soldier Field. The entire sighting lasted about a minute and a half, from the time we saw it to the time it cut left and went toward the field. All three of us saw it, and all three of us were 100% sober and definitely not hallucinating. I'm pretty confident that other people must have seen it too, because most of the island was filled with people there to view the eclipse. That thing was scary and definitely not something that should be messed with. It looked like it could rip somebody to shreds if it wanted to. That creature had to be about 6, maybe 7 foot tall at a guess, because it was in flight when we saw it. The wings were ginormous and were at least 6 feet wide when we saw them. You could tell that the wings were catching air too, because there was a wave motion as the creature glided along. I remember when it banked to the left, it flapped its wings at least 3 or 4 times to gain altitude. It looked like it had a small tail from what we could see, and that the feet ended in what looked like claws or talons. We didn't see many features of the face as it was flying and might even have been looking away from us. And bear in mind, we were in absolute shock. Honestly, I don't know what I can compare it to, as it was much larger than any bird I've ever seen, including the eagles I grew up with in Alaska. In fact, this thing put many of them to shame in terms of size. And there was one other strange thing that happened that day, which was, I believe, related to the sighting. Right after the creature went out of sight, there was an unusual and clearly audible hum that lingered in the area for about 30 minutes. I know for sure it lasted half an hour because we hung around the spot for at least another hour to observe the eclipse, then pack up after, and of course, in case the flying creature appeared again. It is strange for a Mothman to be sighted at 1:30 in the afternoon. We can almost certainly presume that its appearance was due to the impending eclipse. This raises so many questions about how it knew the eclipse was about to occur and why it was so active at that time. But the most fascinating part of this sighting for me is the audible hum, which hung in the air where the Mothman had been seen for a good half hour afterwards. What was that all about? Some residual energy or frequency, perhaps? I'd love to read your thoughts on this in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, check out the one on screen now. And remember, it's a strange world. Keep your eyes and ears open and be kind. Cheerio!